everybody. I hope you're well today. It's good to be back together with you again. I'm sure you noticed that our intro music today was a song from Colton Dixon called Miracles. It's part of some new music that Colton's putting out. It's fantastic. I would highly encourage you guys to check it out. But that song, Miracles in particular, is appropriate for two main reasons today. One is because we're going to be talking about another miracle of Jesus found in the Gospel of Mark. And the second reason it's appropriate today is because Colton and I are sort of like doppelgangers. It's not unusual for people to mistake us for one another. I'm sure he gets it too. But, you know, it's pretty common that I'll be walking down the street and someone will just start yelling, "Colton, Colton!" And I'll have to stop and explain again that, no, I'm not Colton Dixon. I'm just Micah Corder, a regular guy. So, anyways, maybe our production team could put up a couple pictures of me and a couple pictures of Colton. I think you guys will agree that the similarities are pretty striking. So it's pretty unbelievable. So take a look. But speaking of my production team, maybe I should introduce you to them because they're doing a lot of work behind the scenes. Let me do that now. Okay, here's our director, Kate. And then we have our camera operator, Hadley. Over here is our sound technician, Ella. And finally, we have, last but not least, our executive producer, Faith. Don't let that smile fool you, though. She's a drill sergeant, that one.
Get back to work.
Oh my goodness. Okay. Let me get set back up here and we'll get going again. Okay, we're all set up again and ready to go. Now, as I mentioned, we're going to be looking at another miracle found in the Gospels today. And when I say miracle, you may be thinking of a few different things. For example, like me, maybe you're thinking about hitting your golf ball and actually going where you aimed it to go. Or maybe you're thinking about asking your children to do something and they actually do it. That's a miracle. Or for others, you're thinking of saying something you probably shouldn't have said, or accidentally flushing the toilet and then realizing I'm on a Zoom call, and you run over and you check it and your Zoom call's on mute. That's a miracle for sure. But those aren't the kind of miracles we're talking about. You know, a few weeks ago we looked at the miracle of Jesus walking on the water, and today we're looking at another miracle of Jesus. The one we're looking at today is found in Mark chapter 4, starting in verse 35. It's Jesus calming a storm. But before we jump into it, let me give you a little background. Jesus is with the disciples. They're in a boat. He's a few feet off of shore, and all these people have gathered on the shore to hear him talk. So Jesus is teaching the people, and he's telling parables and stories, and then he'll look to the disciples and he'll explain the parables. And at the end of the day, we find in verse 35, this happens. That day, when evening came, he said to his disciples, "Let us go over to the other side." Leaving the crowd behind, they took him along just as he was in the boat. There were also other boats with him. A furious squall came up and the waves broke over the boat so that it was nearly swamped. Jesus was in the stern, sleeping on a cushion. The disciples woke him and said to him, "Teacher, don't you care if we drown?" You know, this is an amazing story, and it's one that I relate to on so many different levels. I often think that trouble comes in our lives when we're making bad decisions or doing our own thing or being disobedient, but that's really not what's happening in this story at all. The disciples aren't being disobedient. They're not making bad decisions. As a matter of fact, they're doing exactly what Jesus asked them to do by going to the other side of the lake. And yet here they are in the middle of this storm, and they're so scared they think they're going to die. So they wake Jesus up and they say, "Don't you care if we drown?" You know, in my own life, I've realized that when I face a difficult situation like that, I don't necessarily turn to Jesus first. I'll try to do everything I can within my own power, using my own intellect or reasoning or my own abilities to try and get through the situation as quickly as I possibly can, without anyone else's help. I imagine the disciples are probably doing the same thing here. They're probably bailing water out of the boat, or rowing harder and harder, or charting a different course to get through the storm as quickly as they possibly can. But they've not gone over to Jesus and asked him if he'd help. As a matter of fact, Jesus is just sleeping in the boat. And I imagine that, like me, the more I do and the less is working, the more I'm getting frustrated with the situation. And the disciples are probably getting more and more frustrated with Jesus. Here he is, this guy that's been telling them that he is the Son of God, that he has all this power and authority, and he's sleeping in the boat. He's the one that can help them get through this. Whether it's just an extra man to row or to help think through how to get through the storm and chart a different course, whatever it is, they think Jesus can help, but they haven't gone to wake him up yet, and they think he doesn't care because he's asleep in the boat. Oftentimes in our lives, we find ourselves in that situation where we think Jesus just he's not interested. He's not engaged in my daily life. He doesn't care what's going on, but it's not that. It's just we don't go to him to ask him for his help. And disciples don't go until it's desperate. And that's typically when I go to Jesus, is when things get desperate and I have nowhere else to turn. So again, the disciples go to Jesus, they wake him up and they ask, "Teacher, don't you care if we drown?" And there's a level of frustration and anger in that question that I totally understand. You know, the disciples are in a situation they can't control. It's a scary situation. I think the more they try to fix it themselves and the more unsuccessful they become, I think the more frustrated they become looking over and seeing Jesus asleep in the boat. To the point where they don't just believe that Jesus is unwilling to help them at this point. They've now convinced themselves that he doesn't even care if they live or die. He doesn't care about them at all. And he's totally disengaged. And I've been there a few times in my life, and the most recent is probably in the last week or two. I told Sarah last weekend that I was feeling really disconnected from the Lord and discouraged and down, and looking around at the situation we're facing in our country, in our world right now. I'm just really discouraged. I feel like, we're stuck in our houses. We're isolated from our friends like you all that often give us so much encouragement and give our lives fullness and joy. We can't see friends and loved ones, and life that we know may never return. And so I've been really down, but the main reason for that is because I haven't been pursuing the Lord the way that I know I should be, or the way I'd like to be. I confessed that to Sarah, and I actually even expressed a little anxiety over what I was going to share with you all today, and Sarah just encouraged me to be honest with you. And so I'm trying to do that. I'm trying to just tell you the truth of where I am in my walk with the Lord. In the last week or two, I've really been struggling. And the more I've gotten into the scriptures in preparation for this time together and looked at the miracles of Jesus, and this one in particular, the more encouraged I've become. And so I know that Jesus is concerned with our lives, our day-to-day life, and all the things that we're dealing with. It's interesting that Jesus never gave the disciples any reason to believe that he didn't care whether they live or died. It's not like they'd come to him and said, "Hey, Jesus, can you help us? The waves are getting a little bit bigger and we need some help." And Jesus denied them. Jesus didn't say, "Hey guys, I'm trying to sleep here, okay? Leave me alone. Leave me out of it. You guys are fishermen. You've been on the water your whole lives. Surely you can get through a little storm." They didn't even give Jesus that opportunity. And yet they've convinced themselves that Jesus doesn't care whether they live or die. It's easy to work ourselves up to that when we're not spending significant time with him or in close relationship with Jesus and know the truth about how he feels about each one of us. But the way he responds to the disciples, I think, is amazing. And let's look at verse 39. It says, "He got up, rebuked the wind, and said to the waves, 'Quiet, be still.' Then the wind died down and it was completely calm. He said to his disciples, 'Why are you so afraid? Do you still have no faith?'" This is unbelievable. Jesus stands up and tells the wind and the waves to be quiet, and they obey him. I'm sure the disciples in their wildest imagination never thought Jesus would be able to do something like this. I'm sure they just were hoping he'd help in somehow, some way. That's why they woke him up. They needed his help, and they thought he could help. But never did they imagine that he would have this kind of power and authority. But this is what's so amazing about Jesus leading these disciples into this difficult circumstance and experience. And I chose those words very carefully. Jesus leads them into this situation. He allows them to go in, but more than that, he leads them here. He knows what's coming. And in our own lives, sometimes Jesus will lead us into situations that are very difficult for us because he wants to reveal himself to us and to show us his glory. And so Jesus does that with the disciples here. They don't know what to expect, but when Jesus says, "Quiet, be still," they see Jesus on a whole new level and the power and authority that he has. This is awesome that Jesus does this. But then he says to the disciples, he asks them sort of an interesting question. He says, "Why are you so afraid?" For you and I, fear is totally understandable in this situation. These guys are thinking they may die, and they're scared. But to Jesus, he's not worried about this situation. This is not something that concerns him at all. As a matter of fact, he's so at peace with it that he's sleeping through the whole thing. And that's not because Jesus doesn't care about our daily circumstances. He totally cares about what we're going through. And he wants to be in it with us. But Jesus is dealing with something that's way more significant. Always. That's always his primary focus. He's thinking about going to the cross and finishing the work that the Father has given him to do. He's thinking about eternity and the ability for us to be in relationship with him and his Father. Not only just here and now, in the middle of this storm, and whatever storm you're going through, yes, he wants us to have that ability to connect with him here and now. But he wants us to be able to do that forever, in eternity, with he and his Father in their kingdom. And so Jesus' focus is on things that are more significant and lasting and eternal, not so temporary as we're often distracted by and concerned with. And then Jesus asked them, "Do you still have no faith?" And I think this is a very important question Jesus asks. Yes, ultimately the disciples did come wake Jesus up and ask if he cared and if he'd help. But I think Jesus is referring to the fact that they came to him with the assumption that he did not care about them, that he didn't care whether they lived or died, and that he wasn't willing to help. I think Jesus wants us to come to him all the time, all day, every day, even in moments of desperation, but before moments of desperation, and to trust and believe that he is who he says he is, and that he loves us and wants to be with us and help us. Jesus is desperate to be with us in our day, and he does love us and care about us, and he wants the disciples to know that, and he wants you to know that today. And he wants me to know that. I'm almost embarrassed to say the last couple weeks that I haven't been really diligent in pursuing Jesus, and then I'm surprised by the fact that I'm discouraged and disheartened and I'm down and looking at the world and trying to find some sort of meaning and purpose and answers from the world and encouragement from the world. Of course I'm not going to be encouraged by the news media and the situation and circumstances around us right now. The world doesn't offer us peace and encouragement like that. But as we pursue Jesus consistently and daily, and really not even daily, all the time, every minute of every day, as we pursue him, he brings us a peace and a encouragement that we can't get anywhere else. It's unlike any other peace we can ever find. And he wants us to know that he loves us desperately and wants to be with us. But one of the challenges of this time that we're in the middle of is we're isolated from each other. So many of you are an encouragement to me regularly in the way that I pursue the Lord, and the reminder that you give that Jesus is who he says he is, and that he's available to me, and that I should be going to him and pursuing him. Without that encouragement from you and from friends like you, it's hard. And I struggle pursuing the Lord in this time. And I think that it's just been an example to me of how important it is for us to be in close relationships with each other, and that those relationships often encourage us in our walks with Jesus, in the way that we pursue him and follow him daily. And so through this time, I just want you to know that I'm thinking of you and praying for you, and I ask that you would do the same for me, so that we can still be together, even though maybe not face to face, but that we can encourage one another, and all the more as we see the day approaching, where this is over and we're back to close, intimate proximity and relationship with one another. There's a great story in Mark 9 of a father who brings his son to Jesus. His son is demon-possessed, and he brings him to Jesus, and Jesus asks the boy's father, "How long has he been like this?" "From childhood," he answered. "It has often thrown him into the fire or water to kill him. But if you can do anything, take pity on us and help us." "If you can," said Jesus, "everything is possible for one who believes." Immediately the boy's father exclaimed, "I do believe. Help me overcome my unbelief." I love that Jesus says everything is possible for one who believes, but I also love that this father is honest with Jesus. And I think it's something that we can learn from. And I'm trying to learn from today as well in sharing this message with you and trying to be honest with you by saying, I do believe in Jesus, but I need help overcoming my unbelief. And there are times when I struggle with belief. Just like I imagine maybe there's times when you struggle with your belief. And I think Jesus can handle that. And he's okay with that. And he wants us to come to him and bring him that confession and say, "Lord, help me overcome my unbelief." Because he loves us and he cares about us and he wants to help us. Even with our unbelief, he wants to help us. So I think that's important for us as we continue to walk through these days and pursue him, that we'd be honest with one another and honest with the Lord. And then in verse 41 it says, the disciples were terrified and asked each other, "Who is this? Even the wind and the waves obey him." They're struggling. They're still not quite sure. But they're impressed for sure, and they know that he is someone special. Who is this that even the winds and the waves obey him? I think this is a question that we need to contemplate all the time throughout our day. Who is this person Jesus? Who could he possibly be? Is he perhaps who he says he is? Because the way he demonstrates to the disciples in this passage in the scriptures, and the way he's demonstrated to me throughout my life over and over again is there is no doubt that Jesus is the Son of God and that He loves us and He came for each one of us. I hope you're encouraged today. I hope you trust that and that you love each other well in your houses and whoever you're with, and that you are encouraged and know how much the Lord loves you today. Certainly look forward to being with you again soon. Hope this time was encouragement to you. Continue to pursue Jesus. I'll do the same, I promise, and we'll be back together again soon. Love you all. Blessings.
Tell me, how do miracles just happen like that, happen like that, happen like that? You can see the stars align, but I know that it's more than timing.